Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is April 9, 2022, and in this video we're going to look at the generally not doing so well U.S. economy, with special focus on the U.S. housing crisis. Very few politicians are talking about the housing crisis, but it's a very real phenomenon that is going to have to get addressed in the near future because honestly it's becoming virtually impossible to definitely buy a house, and even the rental market is getting insanely expensive. In closing, we will take a look at a particular article about a Canadian company, Tricon, which is buying up tens of thousands of single family U.S. residential homes and then renting them back to the U.S. population. This really needs to become a focal point of struggle. I mean, housing in general, but then corporations like this in particular that are buying up houses while new houses are not getting made. And so we'll get into the details. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. Consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So let's start out with a quick article. This is from fatherly.com. The headline is, "You'll need $5,200 more this year to live the exact same life." In other words, things are getting dramatically more expensive year by year in the United States. Economists from Bloomberg have estimated that the average U.S. household will be forced to spend $433 more per month this year for the same things they bought in 2021. This is by Devin McGinnis, April 4, 2022. The current inflation rate, where prices are rising at the fastest pace that they have in 40 plus years, is walloping the wallets of parents. Working families are now struggling with rising gas prices, higher grocery bills, and a housing market that seems out of control. Just look at rent costs that have skyrocketed as much as 40% in some cities. With new data from Bloomberg, economists have found out just how much inflation will impact a family budget in a dollar amount this year. As of February 2022, the Consumer Price Index rose by 7.9% over last year. That massive growth in the cost of everyday items, from eggs to vegetables, has the potential to completely screw with our budgets, and it will continue to impact our budgets over the next few months, to the tune of many hundreds of dollars a month. Quote, "Inflation will mean that the average U.S. household has to spend an extra $5,200 this year, $433 per month, compared to last year for the same consumption basket," Bloomberg Economics reports. Now, commenting, I just want to mention that the average U.S. household size has been shrinking over the last 60 years steadily. It used to be closer to 3.5. Currently, it's 2.51 people per household. So that seems to be what this is based off of. Continuing, having to spend an extra $433 per month to get the same is a hefty, even gargantuan ask for anyone, especially parents who are already struggling to keep a roof over their kids' heads and food on the table. And with social safety net supports having disappeared, like the end of stimulus checks, extended and enhanced unemployment insurance, and the end of programs like the child tax credit, and with student loan payments set to resume, in May of course, parents are in for a reckoning, one they're already working through. Now, with costs of meats, milk, and vegetables ballooning, and rent and home costs going up too, budgets are going to be very tight, even impossible to manage for many parents. Last year, the child tax credit helped parents stabilize economically during another whirlwind year. The landmark program brought over 4 million children out of poverty, who have already fallen back into it since it expired in January of 2022. Comment, I remember the Democrats were going on and on and on about that last year, and it was a crumb, and that was that, and they don't really care about structurally changing anything. The fundamental task of the U.S. left is to break completely with the Democratic Party and all capitalist political parties. Continuing, another program that would undoubtedly help is increasing the minimum wage at the federal level to at least $15 an hour, which is still lower than what it would be if wages kept up with the rise in the cost of living. So comment there. Again, Democrats, when Biden came into office, Pelosi, Schumer, everybody's like, oh, we're all on board with $15 an hour, and then they just didn't do it. This party, if it had any serious competition, would never win another election again. Continuing, In the meantime, utilizing some practical tips for cost saving can help parents get by. Budget groceries, clipping coupons, shopping for sales, going through your cabinets and fridge before every food shopping excursion, and always sticking to a list are a few practical ways to save money or stick to a strict food budget. Now, I just want to comment there. I ran up to the store last night to get like a few things. Like, it wasn't a major trip. I just needed to get some various supplies. It wound up being like $110. And I barely got anything, honestly. I was like, okay, how the hell did I spend over $100 like in a 10-minute shopping trip? You know, and then of course a full trip is closer to like $250. And guess what? I cook a lot of my own food from raw ingredients, so I'm not buying lots of prepared food, you know, frozen meals and like prepared stuff at the deli section and whatever. I cook a lot of my own stuff using store brand stuff, not getting the fancy kind. And it's still, short of clipping tons of coupons, I do all the stuff. I've read several articles on, how to save the most at the grocery store. I'm already doing like 9 out of 10 of them. And it's just inescapable. Stuff costs way too much right now. Food specifically. And I mean, honestly, maintaining these kinds of food prices, this is a great way for just the entire U.S. working class to go broke. People just simply can't afford that kind of a budget for something so basic and essential. Anyway, so that's the end of that article. And they mentioned rent increases. So let's take a real quick look at a report from rent.com. This is the Rent Report, March 2022, a monthly look at average rent price trends across the United States. This is by John Leckie from March 15, 2022. The article says, despite minor relief in one-bedroom prices nationally, the rental market remains red hot for both apartments and houses. Rental prices for single-family homes are at an all-time high. Let me say that again. Rental prices for single-family homes are at an all-time high, increasing an average of 7.8% in 2021. And while notoriously expensive Los Angeles, California, did see year-over-year decreases in its one-bedroom prices, just to its south, the city of Huntington Beach continues to see big increases in both unit types. Of the markets in our analysis, 97.7% recorded price increases for one bedrooms, and all markets saw increases for two bedrooms. Let me say that again. All markets saw increases for two-bedroom apartments. Let's look at where rent prices stand today. So they go through a number of statistics in this article. Basically, in the U.S., the average one bedroom is almost $1,700 a month, $1,684 to be specific. Year-on-year change, that is up 24.4% in 1 year. Two bedrooms, average is $2,000 a month, $1,997. That is a 21.8% increase from last year. And guess what? If you go back to last year, well, let's do it right now. This is from howmuch.net. The title of the article is Top 10 U.S. Cities by Fastest Growing and Declining Rent Prices. So this is from last year, 2021, looking back at 2020. Here's a quick graphic. I like this. It's nice and colorful. Top 10 U.S. cities by fastest growing or declining rent prices. So the top 10 fastest growing were Las Vegas, Nevada, went up 45.6%. The average is now $1,997. Number 2, Buffalo, New York, of all places, went up 41.8% in a year. This is again April 2020 to April 2021. After that, number 3 was Scottsdale, Arizona, went up 36.8%. The average there is now $3,125 a month for a two-bedroom apartment. All right, you can see the rest of the things on the screen. Detroit was in at number 4. The average two-bedroom is now $2,320, and that went up 31.4% in a year. Now, there are some that are declining. However, look at some of the actual prices. So the fastest declining was Seattle, Washington. It went down 26.3%. Now, that's a little over half of the fastest increasing rate, so keep that in mind. The ones that are decreasing are not doing so at the same rate that the increasing ones are increasing. But also look at the absolute price. Yeah, it came down 26%, but it's $28.84. And number 2 is Miami, Florida. Came down 20.5%, but it's still $23.83 a month. So continuing with the text summary, based on average city rent price trends for two-bedroom apartments from April 2020 to April 2021, skipping down to that last bullet point, the average percentage that most rent prices increased was 30.3%. The average percent that rent prices decreased was 16.8%. So again, the ones that increased at almost double the percentage that the ones that decreased. So back to the 2022 article looking back at 2021. I just wanted to show you this is not some fluke. This has been going on for a while now. And if you look at overall the housing price increase, this has been going on for like 6 years in a row. So here is a graphic of the United States. Basically, the darker blue that a state is, the more that its rents increased on average. And then the white to gray are either no change or slight decrease, minus 5%. Basically, this ranges from minus 5% to 115%. That's the change. So things that decreased did so by a maximum of 5%. Things that increased did so by a maximum of 115%. Is this skewed in one particular direction? Yes, strongly. So here's a list of city average rent price trends. Basically, they look at the United States 100 largest cities and then the ones that increased or decreased the most. So these were the ones with the one-bedroom biggest rent price increases. Long Beach, California, that went up 56.7%, again in 1 year. Chandler, Arizona, 50.8%. Amarillo, Texas, 46.6% up. Huntington Beach, California, plus 44.9%. Jersey City, New Jersey, plus 43.6%. Orlando, Florida, plus 42.4%. Irvine, California, plus 39.2%. Austin, Texas, plus 36.9%. Portland, Oregon, plus 34.2%. And Mesa, Arizona, plus 30.6%. So then the cities that had the biggest one-bedroom price decreases. Kansas City, Missouri, that was the biggest. It went down 19.7%. Again, compare that to the biggest increase, 56.7%. Toledo, Ohio, went down 18.2%. Then we get into single digits. Madison, Wisconsin, minus 7.4%. Indianapolis, Indiana, Atlanta, Georgia, Lincoln, Nebraska, Cleveland, Ohio, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Durham, North Carolina, and these were all 7.1% or less, down to 2.6% at Durham, North Carolina. So those were the biggest decreases. And even in the top 10, you're down to minus 2.6%. Now, if we look at two bedrooms, basically we see the exact same pattern, even more extreme though. So Fresno, California, price of a two-bedroom on average went up 71.3%. Huntington Beach, California again, 55.2%. Little Rock, Arkansas, for whatever reason, went up 45%. Salt Lake City, Utah, plus 43.2%. On down the list, the lowest in the top 10 is San Diego with 34.3% average increase in a two-bedroom rent price. So then on the decreasing list, we have cities like Kansas City, Missouri, number 1, went down 23.2%. Then Scottsdale, Arizona, 18% decrease. Durham, North Carolina, 17% decrease. Then Anaheim, California, 11% decrease. Then we get into the single digits by number 5, Baton Rouge, minus 8.4. And then number 10 is Los Angeles, California, where there was a 3.6% decrease. And that is the 10th biggest decrease, 3.6%. Again, compared to San Diego, the 10th biggest increase, 34.3%. So again, is this skewed in a particular direction? Here is a graphic, year-over-year rent changes. And you can see that, again, the decrease is gray, white is neutral, and then blue. The darker the blue, the bigger the increase. The range here is up to a 20% decrease and up to a 60% increase. So again, the maximum increase is 3 times the size of the biggest decrease. And look at the cities. Yes, some things in the Rust Belt are more gray, and then there's a few things of gray scattered throughout the southeast, but pretty much everything else is light to dark blue. So while we have this open, let's look also at rental industry trends in the same article. It says, in addition to our pricing trends, here are a few key industry developments. Number 1, single-family home prices soar in the rental market. Now remember this later when we do an article called Renting the American Dream, which is about that Canadian company buying up U.S. houses and then renting them back to people. Houses that were not really intended to be rental properties. They were intended to be, occupied by the homeowner. So apartments aren't the only property type experiencing inflated rent prices. According to new data released by CoreLogic Inc., single-family rental prices grew an average of 7.8% in 2021, an all-time high. Many renters have put their home-buying dreams on pause due to increasing home prices and bidding wars. Redfin shared that the median home price jumped 14% year over year in January, while active listings remain low. But renting a home may prove just as hard, as some rentals are receiving as many as 20 applications in a single day on the market. Quote, I literally have people begging me to get them a rental, Atlanta real estate agent Jamie Douglas told Bloomberg. It's just so crazy down here. Indeed. Point 2. Inflation is creating further hardship for tenants. On top of rising rents, tenants are also facing higher prices at grocery stores, as we were just covering, and in their utility bills. That's according to the latest inflation numbers from the Labor Department, which put year-over-year inflation at 7.5%, the highest since January 1982, so the highest in 40 years. Groceries are up almost 8%, and electricity prices are more than 10% higher than they were in 2021. Quote, they have to pay for their rent, they have to go to the grocery store, Sarah House of Wells Fargo told NPR. So what we're seeing is this inflation environment in many ways is continuing to bite even worse than when we saw bigger monthly gains back in the spring when it was used cars and some increase in recreation. These are purchases that consumers can't avoid. So that's what I was saying before. You can't just have people, experiencing these kind of staggering price increases in basic essentials that people buy every 2 weeks or, every week and a half or something. So closing out this report, there is a quick ranking of one-bedroom average rent as of February 2022. And, man, buckle up. So Jersey City, New Jersey tops the list. Guess how much a one-bedroom is in Jersey City on average? $3,757 a month. And that's a year-on-year change of almost 44%. Next on the list, Boston, Massachusetts. Average rent, $36.64 a month for a one-bedroom. That's a 6% increase from the previous year. Number 3, San Francisco, $3,500 a month, and that's a 15.3% change. So you can see the rest of the list. It's there on the screen. Absolutely insane. How is anybody supposed to live in this environment, especially when the minimum wage just has not budged for a long time, and most of the jobs that you can find are within a few dollars of the minimum wage. People sometimes will say, oh, the minimum wage, you're not supposed to actually be able to live on it. First of all, that's crazy. Yes, you are. But beyond that, the fact is that it's not just like, oh, that's the starting point, and then wages, get dramatically better as you go up. The vast majority of jobs that you will find advertised pretty much anywhere in job ads is going to be within about $5 of the minimum wage. So it's pretty relevant. Anyway, let's move on into some articles about the houses for sale market. We just talked about renting somewhat. So things are not any better in the house buying market. Here's an article from CNBC. The title is Surging Interest Rates Push Mortgage Demand Down More Than 40% from a year ago. Okay, that's a pretty big decrease. Date is April 6, 2022. This is by Diana Olick. Key points. The average contract interest rate for 30-year fixed-rate mortgages with conforming loan balances $647,200 or less, increased from 4.8% to 4.9% for loans with a 20% down payment. So I just want to note here, 20% down payment is key in terms of buying houses and mortgages because it's the number where basically if you put a down payment of 20% or more at the time of buying, then you don't have to get mortgage insurance. Now, that might sound like a good, oh, I have mortgage insurance. No. It's not insurance for the buyer. It's insurance for the mortgage lender. Basically, if you can't afford to pay 20% of the cost up front in a down payment, then they consider you more risky because it means that you don't have savings and you're whatever, financially irresponsible, blah, blah, blah. So they consider it riskier to give a mortgage to somebody who can afford a 20% down payment. So you might not wind up paying the mortgage. You might default. Okay. So then that leaves the lender basically having, made this loan to you and then they're not getting paid. So they make you buy mortgage insurance so that if you default, they still get paid. That's what the insurance is for. So who pays for that? You pay for it. So if you can't afford a 20% down payment, you're going to be paying potentially hundreds of dollars more per month just to guarantee that the lender is going to get paid one way or another. I mean, you might lose your house, but whatever. So that's point one. In summary, the average contract interest rate for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, where it has a fixed interest rate, and 30-year is pretty long term. It's about as long term as you generally see in the US. You'll also see shorter ones like 20-year or whatever, but anyway, 30-year, that's like how you get the lower monthly payment is you pay over a longer period of time. Of course, you're going to pay more in interest, but that's the price of being poor, right? The American way. You know that US capitalists who ruled this country wouldn't have it any other way. So anyway, those average contract interest rates went up from 4.8% to 4.9%. So we're almost at 5% right now. So point two, applications to refinance a home loan, which have been falling steadily for months, dropped another 10% week to week. 10% drop in a single week. Point three, mortgage applications to purchase a home fell 3% for the week and were 9% lower than the same week 1 year ago. So that's point three. And I want to, highlight again from the headline, they're emphasizing that they feel that the surging interest rates are the cause of pushing the mortgage demand down, again, more than 40% from a year ago. And that may well be even a major factor. I want to mention something else. I'm not sure if they're going to mention in the article or not. Many houses are being bought with cash today because, another article we're going to get into in this video is how many younger people are having to buy houses sight unseen because literally things will go on the market and then they are bought and paid for, oftentimes with cash, for more than the asking price. That's how desperately this is a seller's market. Buyers are just climbing over each other you can have my firstborn child. You can have my firstborn and my secondborn child. Please, we need a house. That, it's so bad. I was reading anecdotally something on Twitter. Guy who was an MD, PhD. He's like, I make $500,000 a year. I am highly educated. I have a stable job as a doctor. And he could not get a house. He was offering $50,000 over the asking price, was still not getting houses. So this is the kind of situation that we're in. You can have perfect credit, great job, cash in hand, still not working out. So it's who is even getting these houses? Anyway, my point is, one other reason that the mortgage demand may be going down is that if you wait around for a mortgage, you may not even get the house. You have to literally show up with a briefcase full of $100 bills. And then maybe you will get the privilege of living indoors. But yeah, these days of something goes on the market, you check it out, you maybe do your due diligence, you get a home inspection, all that kind of stuff. No, people are literally buying stuff that they've never set foot in because there's literally no time to even look at it. That's how desperate this is. Anyway, Let's read the article. Rising interest rates are crushing the mortgage market as precious few homeowners can now benefit from a refinance, and more potential homebuyers become priced out. So comment there, what are they saying? Sometimes people who have already paid for their house will get an additional mortgage. Like, in other words, the house is something that they own and you can borrow against it. You can get cash up front and then, you have to pay it back on a monthly basis. And if you don't make the payments, then they can take your house. But anyway, the interest rates are so bad, people aren't really finding that an appealing offer. Second point, more potential home buyers become priced out. Houses are so expensive, it's like you can't even get the mortgage anyway. So continuing, total mortgage application volume fell another 6% last week compared with the previous week, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association's seasonally adjusted index. The volume was down 41% from the same week 1 year ago. The average contract interest rate for 30-year fixed-rate mortgages with conforming loan balances, $647,000 or less, increased to 4.9% from 4.8%, with points decreasing to 0.53 from 0.56, including the origination fee, for loans with a 20% down payment. That rate was just 3.36 1 year ago. That is the fourth consecutive week of increases. Applications to refinance a home loan, which have been falling steadily for months, dropped another 10% week to week. Refinance demand was 62% lower than the same week 1 year ago. Quote, mortgage application volume continues to decline due to rapidly rising mortgage rates, as financial markets expect significantly tighter monetary policy in the coming months, said Joel Kahn, an MBA economist. Quote, as higher rates reduce the incentive to refinance, application volume dropped to its lowest level since the spring of 2019, unquote. The refinance share of all applications fell to 38.8% from 51%, a slim majority, a year ago. Mortgage applications to purchase a home declined 3% for the week and were 9% lower than the same week 1 year ago. A strong employment market with continuing wage growth is keeping housing demand hot. Comment. Let's say relatively strong employment market compared to like the middle of the pandemic, for example, which, by the way, as we enter the third year of the pandemic right now, we just had the worst surge of the pandemic by far, and we're about to enter another one, the BA2 variant of Omicron. That is just on the, but anyway, people are still being forced to work. All the programs have been cut and whatever else. So anyway, quote, strong employment market with, quote, continuing wage growth. Anyway, but the supply of existing homes for sale is still extremely lean. That's putting it mildly. Bidding wars tend to be the rule rather than the exception. Affordability is falling fast. I think it already fell. And entry-level buyers are being sidelined. Quote, the elevated average purchase loan size and steeper 8% drop in FHA purchase applications are both indicative of first-time buyers being disproportionately impacted by supply and affordability challenges, added Kahn. So comment, let me make a point here. If, quote, entry-level buyers are being sidelined, basically meaning you don't have a house, so you are at the entry level, you're entering the state of home ownership, you're probably renting. I mean, some people are going to be living with family or things like that, but you're probably renting. So what was the thing we were just covering? Rental prices are going up, 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 up. So you're in an apartment, the rent's going up, the rent's going up, the rent's going up, and you're trying to get into a house because at this point, it's actually cheaper than renting. That's the insane situation that we're in. But guess what? You can't get in there. Meanwhile, the landlord's tightening the screws because you got nowhere to go. And they know it. Now, we know that they know it because they're involved in real estate, and this is, very easily accessible information. Let's go a step further. If landlords, either, individual landlords or institutional landlords, have a stake, like have an actual financial interest in tenants not being able to escape either to a cheaper rental market because they're few and far between and there may not be anything that you want or need in the areas that have cheaper rent. So you can't escape that way. And they also have an interest in you not being able to buy a house. So would they perhaps try to engineer a situation like that? And well, they certainly would have a financial interest in doing so. So is there collusion between the landlords? And again, these aren't always individual people. Sometimes they're corporations, like large ones even. But yeah, landlords squeezing tenants for more and more monthly rent, and the gatekeepers of, the house buying experience. We'll be keeping that in mind for future videos. Continuing the article, the drop in mortgage business is causing layoffs at companies like Movement Mortgage and Better.com. Mortgage companies had been on massive hiring sprees in the first year of the COVID pandemic, as interest rates set more than a dozen record lows and both refinance and purchase demand surged. So that's the end of that article. So that's a little bit, again, another window into what's going on in this market. Let's now switch to an article from Business Insider. This is by Dan Latu, April 7, 2022, who puts it more plainly in the headline, "First-time buyers are now even more screwed trying to purchase a house." First-time buyers are up against a market where active listings have dropped nearly 67% since 2020, according to Realtor.com. The article continues, only 24% of U.S. Americans think that it's a good time to buy a house, and that bleak outlook will hit first-time homebuyers the hardest. Pause. That's a bit of a strange framing. So basically a lot of this article is trying to take the frustration and anger of first-time homebuyers who are not able to buy anything because there's either nothing available or what's available is extremely expensive. So, in other words, it's accurate to say that it's not a good time to buy a house. Prices are higher than they've been in a very long time. They're trying to take the ire of homebuyers and direct it towards other homeowners who aren't moving up to leave their cheaper, smaller houses to entry-level people. But that's not really the problem. It's that, houses aren't being built. There isn't public housing. There's been a freeze on that for a long time that has just recently. That's one of the things that I will credit AOC with, is working to repeal the ban on public housing construction, which had been in effect since the 90s. So that's positive, but we're still in basically free fall currently. So yeah, it's just sort of weird framing to be like, oh, buyer pessimism is hurting. There's so many other structural things, and it doesn't even really get into the question of well, is it a founded concept? Is this a founded belief that it's not a good time to buy a house? Anyway, continuing. Consumer pessimism hit a record low in the latest version of Fannie Mae's Home Purchase Sentiment Index, released on Thursday. Well, wait a minute. So, actually, that should be consumer pessimism hit a record high, or consumer optimism hit a record low. We're saying that it's worse than ever. Okay. Again, strange. A year ago, more than 50% of U.S. Americans polled thought that it was a good time to buy a house. So basically, in the last year, the percentage of people who thought it was a good time to buy a house dropped from 50% to 24%. It got cut more than in half. That is how rapidly deteriorating the situation is. Continuing. That pessimism, combined with rising mortgage rates, could discourage what the Fannie Mae economist Mark Pallam called move-up buyers. Instead, those buyers, homeowners looking to upgrade, might stay put in their homes. That inertia doesn't free up starter homes, which tend to be more affordable for first-time buyers. Quote, fewer move-up buyers, so again, you're moving from your, quote, starter home to a bigger one, means fewer available entry-level homes, adding to the rising rate challenges for potential first-time home buyers. So pause again. But what about new construction? I don't think that this article mentions it at all. So we've covered this in previous videos. The amount of, affordable houses that are, not lavish and are basically just for your average working person to buy a house, the amount of construction on those has gone dramatically down over the last 40 years. So that's what's going on. Also, houses don't get newer as they age. They get older and they need more repairs, and eventually they need to be like demolished or replaced. That's how housing works. It ages and falls apart. So you kind of need to keep building new stuff. It's not like you can just keep recycling the same housing forever. Anyway, continuing. First-time homebuyers face many challenges. First-time buyers face several major obstacles in getting their first pair of keys. Low inventory or a lack of available homes to buy has plummeted further during the pandemic. Monthly active listings have tumbled from nearly 1 million 2 years ago, so that was the start of the pandemic 2 years ago, to just 380,000 last month. So that's a 62% decline. Among the few properties that are for sale, starter homes are increasingly hard to find. Plus, first-time buyers may be up against Wall Street and other investors scooping up homes. Comment, this is what I was talking about before, and it will be our closing article in this video. Basically, large corporations are buying residential houses. That's some of where this is going. It's fucking nuts. There needs to be a law about this. It needs to be stopped. Now, this is a Marxist channel. We are for socialist working class revolution. However, even in the very short term, organizing for gains under capitalism, this needs to be brought to an immediate stop and reversed right away. I mean, if this continues, it's honestly kind of hard for me to think about where it's going to end up. It's going to kind of a nightmare scenario. Continuing, investors spent a record $77 billion on house purchases in 2021. So they say home purchases. No. They're not buying homes for themselves. It's an investment. That's why you use the word investors. So don't use the word home. Investors are buying houses as investments, not as... They're buying personal property as commercial investments. So they're just basically taking stuff that was intended for, residential personal use, and they're turning it into a business investment. It needs to be stopped immediately. So they spent a record $77 billion scooping up houses in 2021. This is what's going on currently. In addition to those challenges, many houses on the market are unaffordable for people with the typical U.S. American income. Rapidly rising house prices are outpacing wage growth, a new Adams study found, which makes it even more difficult for people without equity from a previous home to buy a new one. So comment there. Again, if you own a house, you have something to sell. You have equity in it, you have made payments on it, you've got some, value stored there. If you don't have anything stored up, like you're renting where just you own absolutely no share in the rental property, then you don't have that to put towards another purchase. Continuing. The cards seem stacked against young adults trying to get a foothold in the property market. Millennials made up over 40% of first-time homebuyers last year, according to the National Association of Realtors. And that generation of adults, who range from age 26 to 41, has expressed feelings of hopelessness. Yes. Last year, more than 1/3 of millennials in a legal and general survey said that student debt was preventing them from buying a house. The average millennial owes $38,877 in student loan debt, an Experian consumer debt study found, which makes saving up for a down payment and getting a mortgage even more difficult. So that's the end of the article. Let's just highlight that last part again. The average person, age 26 to 41 in the U.S., owes about $40,000 in student loan debt. That's the average. Also, it says that more than 1/3 of millennials, so they don't say half, so it's probably closer to 1/3, more than 1/3 of people 26 to 41 in a legal and general survey said that student debt was preventing them from buying a house. So basically, when you go to get the house loan, the mortgage, they look at a number of things. How much you can put down in cash as a down payment. They look at what's your salary at your current job. They look at what is your debt and like monthly payments that you make on, existing obligations that you have. They look at your overall credit score, like credit history, etc. So even if you have good credit, even if you have high income, if you have a lot of student debt and therefore a high monthly payment for the student debt, then that could get in the way of you qualifying for a mortgage. But anyway, the point here that I'm trying to make is more than 1/3 of millennials said that student debt was preventing them from buying a house. Well, how many millennials went to college by percentage? According to 2018 Pew Research data, 39% of millennials, as of a couple of years ago, 2018, had a bachelor's degree or higher. 39%, which is, quote, more than a third. So within that 39%, some of those people are not going to have student debt. Either their parents paid for part or all of their school tuition, or they got a scholarship or something like that. But then also some people who didn't complete a bachelor's degree still will have a problematic amount of student debt. Now, I don't know exactly what the percentage of people whose parents paid for all or some of the tuition or got a scholarship exactly is of those 39%, but let's assume for a minute that the percentage of people in that 39% of millennials with a college degree as of 2018 who are not having a problem with student debt, in other words, their parents paid for it or they got a scholarship, or otherwise they just went to a very cheap school and they're able to pay it off easily. Let's say that that percentage of the 39% is offset by the percentage within the some college category, because about 25% of millennials do have some college, though that category includes everybody who took, anywhere from one course to just one course shy of graduating. Then basically that 39% is the same, quote, more than 1/3 that said that student debt is preventing them from buying a house. It's very close, at least. So we can say from that roughly, and again, this is rough, but getting a college degree, or at least attending enough college that you've spent a lot of money and you've gotten close to a degree, whether you finish it or not, is a direct impediment to buying a house in almost every case, because the same percentage of millennials who have a college degree are saying that student debt is preventing them from buying a house. If it was 10% of millennials said that student debt was preventing them from buying a house, then we would say, okay, that's about a quarter of millennials with a college degree. But it isn't. It's basically the exact same percentage. So this is where the housing crisis meets the student debt crisis. And why is age important here? Well, for a few reasons. First of all, it's important to look at age because each generation has different statistics on college attendance. So anyway, that was important to look at in this case. Also, younger people have not been out in the workforce for as long. So student debt can be more of a problem because you've had less time, fewer years in which to get out there, work, and pay some of it off. Though in many cases, student debt's so high that people basically never get anywhere on their payments. They're just paying the interest the entire time and they never actually attack the principal, and they're just waiting for eventually the debt to be forgiven after a suitably long amount of time has passed. So yeah, age bracket 26 to 41. This is definitely the period where people are trying to move out of, families' houses or, quote, starter apartments or college dorms or college apartments, whatever it is. They're looking to get their own place, eventually, maybe meet a partner, all that kind of stuff. And this massive amount of student debt, again, in the case of millennials, it seems to be out 1-to-1 of people who went to college and have a problematic amount of debt in terms of buying a house. So this is a structural problem with university pricing. Political action absolutely could and needs to be taken here because it's another factor in the housing crisis and just the general crisis of affordability and the collapse of standards of living. So that's that article. Moving on now to an article from Barron's. The title here, this is from April 1st, is First-Time Homebuyers Are Simply Walking Away. Quote, we've been backed into a corner. Nearly 2 million aspiring homeowners will be shut out of the market this year, according to one estimate. They stand to lose more than just equity. So this is by Shana Mishkin. It starts off, when Kelly Stofko and her fiancé, Liam McRae, started house hunting last August, it was with the vision of trading their 800 square foot Atlanta apartment, it's a small apartment, for a roomier home of their own in time for the holidays. Half a year, dozens of home tours, and 8 unsuccessful bids later, Stofko, 25, and McRae, 26, have moved to the sidelines. Quote, "This has been the most stressful 6 months of my life," Stofko says, adding that she and her fiancé delayed wedding planning to focus on their ultimately unsuccessful search for a house. So, I wasn't able to get the full article from Barron's, but their Twitter summary of the article continues, "A slice of the American dream is disappearing for a growing number of would-be homeowners who are being squeezed out of the housing market. That's due to a historic run-up in home prices." Let's just reemphasize, a historic run-up in home prices. Like, this is historically significant, and it hasn't happened in decades like the way it's happening now. A recent surge in mortgage rates, we covered that earlier, and a stubbornly low inventory of available homes. So again, we covered that in an earlier video, how they're just not building the houses. I'll link to that. The number of people locked out is likely to increase as mortgage rates rise. The National Association of Realtors senior economist Nadia Evangelou estimates that 1.9 million first-time homebuyers will be shut out of the market this year. As home listings dwindled, again, remember we just covered there are fewer listings available by far currently than previously, the median asking price for a home advanced twice as fast as median income did from February 19 to February 2022, according to a Realtor.com analysis. Home price growth outstripped income growth in many of the nation's most populated metros. In 2/3 of the metropolitan areas evaluated by Realtor.com, the share of homes affordable to middle-income buyers declined below pre-pandemic levels, and some markets have felt the crunch more than others despite swift wage gains. In Austin, Texas, only 6% of homes are affordable to the median household. Let's say that again. In Austin, Texas, only 6% of homes are affordable to the median household. In 2019, that share of homes affordable to the median household was 26%. That's despite a 16.7 estimated increase in the median income. So, again, let's just savor this a little bit. The median income went up about 16-17%, but even though it went up, the amount of houses that the median income earner can afford went down from an already pretty miserable 26% in 2019 to just 6%, just barely anything. So median is one form of an average. So in other words, the average income earner can only afford 6% of the houses for sale, and even before the pandemic, they could only afford 26% of the houses for sale. I mean, what should that number be? Like, probably 75, 80%? I don't know. You know, I'm not exactly a housing policy expert. However, what percentage, like, who are they building houses for? Clearly not the average income earner. If you can't afford 94% of the houses on the market, you have to, in other words, be above average income to afford 94% of the stuff on the market. I mean, what should the average income be able to buy? Who should they be building houses for? People with average income and lower, primarily because that's the bulk of the population. Like, what do we know about the distribution here? It's that it's a pyramid. There are very few people at the top, you know, the 1%, with a lot of money. Most people are going to be lower than that by quite a bit. So, I mean, although this is the median, and the median is counted by taking all of the incomes from the lowest to the highest, and then, you know, numerically counting which one is exactly at the halfway point, that doesn't mean that they're evenly distributed. You can still have, you know, all the stuff in the middle being virtually the same, and then, you know, the last 5 are like $1 billion income. So, yeah, and anyway, that is what we know, is that there's massive income and wealth inequality in the United States due to capitalism. The longer that you run capitalism, particularly in, the highly deregulated form that the United States currently is using, then, the more extreme that's going to get. So yeah, the average income earner cannot afford over 90% of the stuff on the market. Well, why is it on the fucking market unless you just want an economy where rich people have 6 or 7 houses and everybody else just rents or is unhoused? So that's kind of the situation we've got. Continuing the article, the challenges facing home hunters without cash reserves, such as younger buyers and historically disadvantaged groups of people, are particularly daunting. Homeownership is a key component of wealth, I would add in the United States, because that's the way the system is here, making up about 30% of the average homeowner's net worth, with home equity contributing a greater than average or greater than 30% share to the net worth of Black and Latino households and middle and low income households. So, in other words, if you have any kind of a positive net worth, probably your house is storing a lot of it, at least a third. And then if you're Black or Latino and middle and low income non-Black and Latino, then it's probably going to be more than 30% of like whatever value you have stored up. Quote, if you can't become a homeowner, it's very difficult to save and build wealth, said at Mark Zandi on Twitter, chief economist at Moody's Analytics. Quote, that cements the income and wealth inequalities in our society. So that's the end of the summary from Barron's of this issue. It's pretty drastic. So this means, people talk sometimes about generational wealth, particularly with regard to Black U.S. Americans and how homeownership is key, that Black families have a harder time, passing anything down from generation to generation, or in other words, have anything saved up to pass down. And in other words, that's where the house comes into play. If you have a house that's worth something, then that's probably going to be like a lot of the wealth that you would have to pass down or like keep in your family. Again, all this is within a capitalist framing. This is a socialist channel, and we want to break out of capitalism entirely, completely just change the paradigm of how all of this stuff is done. But while we are in capitalism, these are some of the factors that are going to be determining people's outcomes. And consequently, they serve as political rallying points. So I hope people are taking notes on all this. These problems are affecting a lot of working class people, and this is a way to get a lot of people on board. So might want to consider working on this. So from here, we got 2 articles left, and they kind of diverge a little bit. So we talked, for example, about right now the fact that owning a house in the United States contributes significantly to, your possibility of passing any wealth down to your children, or like we mentioned before, owning a house, it gives you something to borrow against to get like a second mortgage later on to finance this or that. And I mean, these are important things. If you don't have them, your options are just fewer. So with number 1, new houses not being built at nearly a sufficient rate, and number 2, with corporations buying them up by the tens of thousands as, quote, investments, it's just literally snatching people's ability to save up that equity. And again, it's disproportionately affecting people of color and then, of course, lower income households in general. So keep that in mind when we get to the final article on the Canadian corporation that is, again, scooping up houses intended for, personal single-family use, and then renting them back to people. But before we get there, one final article, again from Business Insider, about the absolutely desperate state that particularly younger people, 26 to 41, are being driven to like when they actually buy a house and they really need to buy one and just go for it, they're buying them without even looking at them. So the article is, millennials are scooping up homes. Again, they say homes. I really prefer houses because that's actually what we're talking about. Home is, kind of more of a concept. Home is where the heart is and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, millennials are scooping up houses sight unseen, and it's going to change the housing market forever. This is by Philip King, April 7. Imagine spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on an object without seeing it in person or touching it. No, we're not talking about NFTs. Okay, I added that. That may make most people break out in hives, but this sort of sight unseen buying has become one of the leading real estate phenomena in the past 2 years, and it may reshape the housing market for years to come. More and more buyers, particularly millennials, are sinking huge sums of money into homes in which they've never set foot. In 2020, 63% of all house buyers surveyed by the online real estate brokerage Redfin made an offer on a house they didn't experience in person. So, honestly, this article goes on for quite a long time after this. That's mainly all I wanted to get out of it. More than half of all house buyers, nearly two-thirds, surveyed by Redfin, had made an offer on a house they didn't even set foot in. They maybe got a virtual tour or something like that, but things are getting snapped up so fast that almost 2 out of 3 house buyers, particularly younger ones, this is people ages 26 to 41, just entering the market, looking for their first house, etc., are not even getting to visit the place first. I mean, again, let alone do a house inspection, all that due diligence. It's so desperate out there. People are making, offers on insanely expensive houses without ever seeing them in person. So the article goes to great lengths. I must really chastise Philip King for being astoundingly out of touch. He basically, throughout the entire article, makes a nod to, quote, pandemic restrictions and, quote, market forces, meaning, quote, the real estate market is historically competitive. Houses sold faster last year than in any other year on record, and the inventory of houses for sale is excruciatingly low, so millennials, just say young buyers, and other house shoppers are willing to take unprecedented risks to avoid losing out in their dream homes, unquote. He makes a nod to these phenomena which are actually driving this whole thing, primarily the market forces, secondarily the pandemic restrictions. Literally the entire rest of the article is about technology and like millennials love their technology and oh wow, won't those millennials, such a quirky generation, is there anything they won't buy online? That's like pretty much the thing. And it's sort of a commercial for like various other pieces of real estate technology. So it sort of mentioned, this could have been a much, much, much better article. It sort of mentions the actual causes driving this sort of desperate behavior where people aren't even inspecting houses that they're spending $400,000, $500,000 on. Sort of mentions them, doesn't really probe into that at all again. But the guy says he's been in real estate for 2 decades, didn't see this coming. I think he's just kind of well off from being in real estate for 2 decades and has no actual idea what it's like to be an average working person anymore. That would be my guess. But again, we get some window into this phenomenon here about how many people, like 2 out of 3 people, are making offers on houses they've never seen. This is unprecedented. So anyway, that's the sort of desperate context for our next and final article. This is about the Canadian company, and this is just one example, but a Canadian company which is buying up, quote, entry-level single-family houses by the tens of thousands per year. So the title is Tricon CEO, and apparently also Prince impersonator, Gary Berman, on his company's next moves, and why he told 60 Minutes millennials don't necessarily desire to own homes. A convenient narrative which isn't true, but does serve his bottom line. In an interview with the Star on Friday, Berman argued that his company is contributing a social good by increasing the supply of rental properties while giving those who can't afford houses the chance to live in good neighborhoods. It's by Jacob Lorink, business reporter, April 2, 2022, from the Toronto Star. And I have to say, before we get into this article, the amount of fucking bullshit this guy Berman spins, like just selectively sharing some ideas without the proper context, it just floors me. His pitch is like, oh, you can't afford a house, but we're a social good because we'll rent you one. Except that part of the reason you can't afford the few houses that are left on the market is that his company bought up a lot of the other ones that were on the market, thus dramatically reducing supply in an age where there's not enough construction going on, etc. So he directly contributed to the problem that he says his company is helping to solve. No, that's not how this works. Particularly as his company is planning to continue to buy up more and more properties in the future, thus shrinking the available pool of houses more and more. So he's pretty much just full of shit from start to finish. Let's read the article. In an interview on CBS News last month, the CEO of Tricon Residential, Gary Berman, presented a tagline of sorts for his company. "You can rent the American dream," he said. Comment. This is a contradiction in terms, because part of the, quote, American dream is the equity of owning a house, whereas when you rent, you do not build up any equity. So this is about the level of honesty you can expect from this guy. It's just manipulation from start to finish. The clip from 60 Minutes was shared widely on social media, drawing widespread attention and criticism to a once obscure Toronto company that has developed a booming business south of the border. In the decade following the 2008 financial crisis, when the U.S. housing market collapsed, Tricon Residential gradually built up a multi-billion-dollar venture, buying swaths of single-family homes in the Sunbelt states. Comment, this is basically the lower third of the United States from coast to coast, so like Southern California all the way through Texas to Florida. Continuing, and renting the units to tenants while keeping the equity. The 34-year-old company advertises an idyllic suburban lifestyle for tenants, replete with picket-fenced lawns and nuclear family decor, but its business model has drawn criticism for reducing housing supply, while aspiring homeowners struggle to access an increasingly exclusive real estate market. So comment, yes, an exclusive is not an adjective that should apply to basic housing. Also, they started doing this after the 2008 crash, so this is yet one more way that the instability of capitalism in the business cycle, the boom-bust cycle, lends itself to the growing wealth divide. So at times of crisis, when everybody's selling things for pennies, people who do have money, who happen to be protected during that particular crash, can go in and scoop things up for a fraction of their original value. And then as, the dust settles and people start trying to do things, they find that they have been consolidated into fewer and fewer hands. So this is a very recent example of something that's going on now, and it has exacerbated the very problem that it claims to be fixing. Continuing. According to recent corporate filings, Tricon now owns approximately 30,000 single-family houses across the U.S., with plans to buy another 20,000 by 2024, making the company one of the largest rental house operators in the country. Last year alone, Tricon amassed 6,383 houses and raised rents across its properties by an average 4.8%, an increase that the company notes is below the U.S. industry average of 14%. Over the same period, the company distributed $50.9 million in dividends to shareholders and $44.3 million in awards and bonuses to company executives. In an interview with The Star on Friday, Berman argued that the company is contributing a social good by increasing the supply of rental properties while giving younger generations, who can't afford a down payment, the chance to live in their preferred neighborhoods. Comment, a chance to live in those neighborhoods under precarious terms and while accruing zero equity. Quote, there are so many families that, for different reasons, want to rent a single-family house or can't afford to buy one. We give them that chance, said Berman. The CEO became the subject of social media scorn, rightly so, following the 60 Minutes interview early in March when he told CBS host Leslie Stahl that, quote, if you asked a lot of millennials, and that tends to be our primary resident, oh, congrats, you're preying on the young and financially vulnerable. Good for you. They would probably tell you they don't necessarily desire to own a home. Okay, do you have any data to back that up? And then as far as those who definitely do, how is that going? And how is your company impacting their ability to do that? Continuing the quote, they've grown, this is such straight bullshit, like buckle your seatbelt. They've grown up in the sharing economy, and what's important to them is lifestyle. So if they can move into this, what we call turnkey or hotel-ready home, and have a low-maintenance lifestyle, that's very compelling for them. said Berman, who earned $4.46 million in 2020. Berman sought to clarify those comments, or rather just backpedal, in his interview with The Star, arguing that while he knows that plenty of millennials want to own homes, there are also many who cannot afford down payments or qualify for mortgages. So comment, what's the solution? Letting predators go in, scoop up houses that were meant to be bought, or taking political action to make sure that people get houses, changing the standards, housing is a right, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the solution is not to let people like this go in and just make an existing problem worse while preying on vulnerable people. Quote, in an American context, they may have tons of student debt or medical debt, which we know has swelled in the U.S. over the last decade and has made it difficult for many people to qualify for a mortgage. There's a credit problem there that can make homeownership very difficult to attain, he said. So comment, why don't you build some apartment buildings? Like if you really believe rental properties are the way out and you're this social justice warrior that really just wants to do good in the world, build some fucking apartment buildings. Don't go around scooping up the houses that people want to buy and that you're just taking off the market. Build some fucking apartment buildings, or at least buy some apartment buildings. That's a way you can still be a scummy landlord and not actually make the housing problem worse, because in that case you wouldn't be taking things off the market. By building new apartment buildings, you'd be putting new properties out there, and that actually makes everything more competitive and there's less strain on the supply. Or at least by buying them, it's neutral, you're not making it any worse. But no, that isn't what this is about. And also, you're so concerned about the student debt problem or the medical debt problem and, just the housing supply problem and people not being able to qualify for a mortgage because U.S. regulators really don't want to rein in capitalist behavior, so they just make it harder for consumers to qualify for housing. He's so concerned about that I'll bet he spends a lot of his $4.46 million, politically campaigning for changes in those areas. I mean, his company's in Canada. I'm sure he can get U.S. citizenship if he doesn't have it already, and I'm sure he could get very involved in that. No. He just wants to profit off of misery and vulnerability. That's it. Tricon's presence in the U.S. differs from its operations in Canada, where the company is presently developing 11 purpose-built rental buildings across the Greater Toronto Area. Those projects, the bulk of which are in downtown Toronto, will contribute more than 5,500 new rental units in a city where average rent for a one-bedroom apartment amounts to $14.46 per month, the company said. So he knows you can build new things. He's familiar with that proposition. Most recently, in March, Tricon partnered with the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board to spend $500 million on the development of 2,000 to 3,000 more rental units, with a first project already slated for development in Toronto's East End. So again, very familiar with this. And by the way, this is not the solution. Public housing, rather than continuously empowering landlords, private landlords, is the solution here. But that is at least creating more housing, albeit with strings attached of this private capitalist scumbag is profiting off of it. But it is adding housing stock. It's at least doing something rather than, being an active drain. Real estate prices soared during the pandemic, driven in part by low interest rates and rising demand. GTA home prices jumped almost 30% in January to $1.3 million, while smaller cities and rural areas have seen increases as high as 50% in 1 year. So GTA is Greater Toronto Area, and the house prices have jumped 30% to $1.3 million. Huge percentage increase and huge absolute price figures that we're ending up with. I mean, even in those terms, like what was $1 million now just magically costs $1.3 million. Just, went up $300,000. And then the smaller cities and rural areas, 50% increase in 1 year. So this is the kind of market we're talking about. While real estate investors snapped up dirt cheap houses in the U.S. in the aftermath of the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, Canada's narrow housing supply and high costs have presented a risk to institutional investors trying the same strategy north of the border, though that has not dissuaded everyone. Last year, Toronto-based developer Core Development Group announced plans to buy $1 billion worth of single-family homes and convert them into 4,000 rentals in Ontario, Quebec, BC, and Atlantic Canada. Toronto-based startup Key, backed by former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Pallaz, launched a co-ownership program last November that allows individuals to invest in fractional shares of properties bought by institutional investors. A recent study from the Bank of Canada found that investor activity doubled in the Canadian housing market between 2020 and 2021. Investors now account for 1/5 of all residential buyers in Canada. Jesus, the data found, and have increased purchases particularly in cheaper areas like Ottawa, Gatineau, Winnipeg, and Halifax. So comment, where do you think this is going? They will buy up everything that is profitable. Everything, because nothing's stopping them from doing it. And then as far as this scheme to allow individuals to invest in fractional shares of properties bought by institutional investors, they only do things that are profitable. So that is just intended to fuck people over in one way or another. Continuing, in the Canadian market, Tricon told The Star it is solely focused on adding supply, not shrinking it. Quote, "We're not interested in buying single-family homes here. The supply constraint is much more acute in Toronto than it is in the U.S., Berman said. Quote, "Here, we desperately need more housing of all types." So that's actually also the case in the U.S. So anyway, I mean, they've switched the focus here to Canada, obviously this being a Canadian paper, but it really kind of still leaves us in the U.S. hanging. The homes we're buying in the U.S. are $300,000. So that's pretty, it's like below median cost. That's about, what you can get a house for. If you go down to $200,000 in a lot of places, you're getting into kind of like, quote, troubled properties. So they're buying kind of prime entry level, quote unquote, stuff. Whereas the homes here in Toronto go for over $1 million. There are so many people priced out of this market, and if we want to be part of the solution, you don't want to be part of the solution, you want profit, then we need to provide more market rate housing, unquote. Initially named Tricon Capital, Gary's father, David Berman, founded the company in 1988 as a boutique development firm off Bay Street that provided funding to local developers building for-sale housing. For several decades, the company operated like a private equity firm, investing primarily in land development projects and condominium projects, subject to the typical boom-bust cycle of real estate. When the company got, quote, crushed in the 2007 to 8 recession, Tricon pivoted to a steadier sector, rental houses. As house prices plummeted in Sunbelt states like Arizona and Texas, Tricon opened a subsidiary focused on rentals and spent the following years buying up single-family dwellings while acquiring competing investment firms, until it held one of the largest portfolios in America. Quote, "We realized we didn't need to build new homes in the U.S. because there was already such a glut of vacant homes." Anyway, so many people lost their houses in 2008, I just don't even know what to say. So we went in, with many other investors, and started buying existing houses and rehabilitating them, said Berman, who joined his dad's company in 2002 after a stint at Goldman Sachs and took over as Tricon's CEO in 2015. I'm sure he learned a lot of valuable, socially positive lessons at Goldman Sachs. The company's collection of single-family rental houses accelerated after Tricon launched a far-reaching company strategy in 2019 aimed at maximizing shareholder value, called Project Genesis, a reference to new beginnings in the biblical sense, but also a nod to the British rock band that spawned successful solo careers for its frontmen Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel, the company wrote in a report to shareholders, who I'm sure really valued that tidbit. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the company bought thousands more single-family homes, doubled its market capitalization, and in 2021 went public on the New York Stock Exchange. To decide its next purchases, the company now uses a 90-factor algorithm that automatically buys houses that fit their criteria, consisting of neighborhood type, price, size, and more. So comment, if anybody remembers the Zillow scandal that came out, this is pretty much the same thing, only with a different end game. Whereas Zillow was trying to buy houses and like flip them for, 20, 30,000 each, they're just hanging on to them and never giving people the opportunity to buy them back. I mean, basically, like, I'd be curious to see, what percentage of particular towns this company is buying. This is just not like, this is, I think, unprecedented completely. So, anyway. Critics say companies like Tricon contribute to the financialization of housing, where corporations treat real estate as a vehicle for wealth and investment rather than a social necessity, often, like is it ever not, to the detriment of individual house buyers. Quote, if you extend this out 10 or 15 years, if these companies' visions unfold, we'll have a much higher percentage of houses belonging to uber wealthy elite hedge funds and make it harder for us to buy property, and the only option is to rent from them, said John Pasalis, president of Realosophy Realty. I don't think that's the ideal solution to housing affordability. Yeah, I mean, for many reasons, not the least of which is there's nothing necessarily affordable about it. Usually, when people corner the market on anything, that's not good for prices. So it's happening fast. I don't see political pushback on this. And most likely, it's all going to happen within the span of a few years. And it will pass the point where anything can really be done about it, save for really drastic measures. Martine August, an assistant professor at the University of Waterloo School of Planning who studies the rise of corporate landlords, notes that the business model of most of these companies is built on boosting rents to maintain positive cash flow. Quote, our research regularly suggests that when financial firms acquire housing en masse and turn it into rental housing, it ends up being bad for renters and for affordability. Not only will it contribute to rising house prices, but it will also lead to higher rents, as these institutions will want to raise their prices to maximize value for their shareholders, August said. And yeah, just a comment, that thing about it's now publicly traded on the stock market is really sticking with me. That's a sickening idea. So they're buying up, tens of thousands, soon it'll be hundreds of thousands of houses, and just trading it on the stock market. And where are people supposed to live? So, I mean, I think this is going to get dire really quickly. Tricon, which charged an average monthly rent of $15.29 in 2021, notes that its rent increases last year were below the industry average. Okay, is that true of every year or what? Because that's now, and they're clearly proud of that. They feel that they can hide behind that statistic. Look to something else, because if that's the one that they keep shoving in your face, it's because they don't want you to see something else. In recent months, the company has expanded its house purchases to more expensive markets, including Phoenix, Las Vegas, Austin, and Nashville, with an eye on, quote, newer vintage homes, which tend to have a higher cost, according to its latest quarterly report. Now, commenting, we were talking about Austin earlier in this video. That's the place where, in just a couple of years, the median income could get you, well, originally only 26% of the houses on the market, and then in just a few short years, only 6%. So that's where they are turning its eye and, overlap. We see the intersection of multiple articles in this video. By 2024, it aims to own more than 50,000 houses, and the company says that it is just in the early innings of what could become a much bigger business. The trends that emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic were a boon for Tricon as public interest in real estate surged and city dwellers increasingly looked to the suburbs to settle down. Quote, our core single-family rental business has been a massive beneficiary of these drivers, the company told investors in its 2021 annual report. The coming years, it said, may be a, quote, golden decade for residential assets, unquote, end of article. I think it's hard to overstate the kind of shift that statements like that from profitable, now publicly traded companies dealing in single-family houses intended for personal use, now being traded on the stock market, the kind of shift that this signals is, I don't remember anyone ever really talking about this in the past, anybody seeing this kind of thing coming, but here it is, and it's coming up fast. This is not a vote with your dollars type of situation. This requires organization and political action. I hate to leave a video on such a dangling, dissonant, tense, unresolved note, but I think that that's the kind of situation we're facing now. So, what do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion there as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. Every donation is encouraging. They're also financially helpful, so thank you very much for those. I appreciate all of the patrons, and your contributions have enabled me to do a lot more content and spend more time with this channel than I would have been able to do otherwise, so it really does help. What also helps is engagement, so liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting on the videos. All of that helps to boost the content in the YouTube algorithm, helps other people to stumble across this content more easily, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this kind of information more accessible to the general public. So thanks for your engagement. It really does help also. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch you in the next video.